In a small, vibrant African village nestled between towering mountains and lush green forests, the air is thick with the sounds of life. Birds chirp in the trees, children play in the dirt roads, and the scent of wood smoke from cooking fires mingles with the sweet fragrance of blooming flowers. The village is known for its close-knit community and its traditions, where stories are passed down through generations, and the mystical elements of the land are believed to hold secrets both ancient and powerful. The sun sets slowly each evening, painting the sky in hues of red and orange, casting long shadows over the village as night falls. In the heart of the village lives a respected couple. The husband, Kofi, a well-known trader with a reputation for honesty, and his wife, Amina, who has not spoken a word in over a decade. Rumors about Amina's silence have swirled in the village, with many wondering why she chose to stop speaking. Some say it was due to heartbreak. Others say it was a curse, and still others whisper that it was a punishment for something she did, or something done to her. Kofi is beloved in the village, seen as a pillar of the community, admired for his kindness and generosity. However, those who have known him for years sense a coldness in his eyes that others fail to see, a darkness that seems to hide beneath his polished exterior. He is devoted to Amina, caring for her and tending to her needs as if she were fragile. One evening, as the village gathers to celebrate a local festival, a mysterious event occurs. Amina, who has remained silent for so long, suddenly speaks. The words that escape her lips are chilling, sharp, and filled with anger. In front of the entire village, she exposes her husband's darkest secret, the true reason behind her silence. The secret is not one of love or betrayal, but something far darker. Amina reveals that Kofi has been hiding a history of violence and manipulation, something that stains the fabric of their seemingly perfect life. She recounts the years of torment she endured in silence, the horrifying truth of Kofi's actions, which include a past so buried in secrecy that the village would never have imagined it. The revelation sends shockwaves through the community as friends and family who have known Kofi for years now question everything they thought they knew about him. Amina's voice, once mute, now echoes with an accusation that shakes the foundation of their world. As the truth unravels, the villagers are forced to confront their own complicity. As they begin to realize they may have been blind to the signs of abuse and darkness that Kofi's charm and good deeds had concealed. The story culminates in a moment of reckoning where Kofi must face the consequences of his actions. But as the village comes to terms with the truth, a chilling twist emerges. Amina's silence was not just a result of her suffering, but a deliberate act to keep something even more sinister from coming to light. Something that could destroy them all. In the end, the village is forever changed by the revelation, as the once vibrant community is left to pick up the pieces of their shattered trust and confront the darkness that has been hidden in plain sight for so many years. Kofi is a well-established trader in the village, known for his charisma and generosity. He comes from a proud lineage, his father being a respected chief in a neighboring village, and he's always felt the weight of expectations to maintain the family's good name. He holds a deep personal regret. Years ago, in a moment of anger and fear of losing his position in the community, he made a choice that would alter his life forever. This choice haunted him, but he buried it deep within, convinced he could outrun it with good deeds and an outwardly perfect life. His personal goal throughout the story is to protect his secret at all costs, while also maintaining the facade of a loving husband to Amina. His greatest fear is being exposed for the dark past he desperately tries to forget. Amina Okoro. Amina, Kofi's wife, is a silent woman with a haunting past of her own. Her silence is both a result of trauma and a conscious decision to protect herself and others from the truth. Deep down, she wants to seek justice and uncover the truth of what has been hidden from the world. She carries a burden of regret for not speaking out sooner, but her journey towards revealing the truth is complicated by the fear of retaliation from Kofi and the village. Her emotional stakes lie in finding a voice after years of suffering, and in the process, finding the strength to face both her abuser and the community's indifference. Kwame is Kofi's childhood friend and longtime business partner. He is a loyal and protective friend, but he also knows that something isn't right about Kofi's past. Kwame has noticed the subtle changes in Kofi over the years, but has always justified them as part of life's hardships. He's torn between loyalty to his friend and the growing suspicion that there is more to Kofi's story than meets the eye. Kwame's emotional stake is rooted in his fear of losing a friendship that has been the cornerstone of his adult life, while also grappling with the guilt of not having noticed the signs of Kofi's actions sooner. Nia is Kofi, and Amina's teenage daughter. Bright and full of hope, Nia is beginning to uncover the cracks in her parents' relationship and starts to see that her mother's silence may have deeper roots. Her emotional stake comes from her desire to protect both of her parents, while also questioning whether the man she has looked up to her whole life is truly the man she thought he was. Nia represents the next generation, struggling with the balance between love, loyalty, and uncovering the truth. Nana Amina, Kofi's mother, is an elderly matriarch in the village who has seen many things in her time. She carries the wisdom of her age, but also holds on to the belief that her son can do no wrong. Nana Amina is torn when the truth about Kofi's past begins to surface, as her love for him is unwavering, but the reality of his actions forces her to confront her own beliefs about family, loyalty, and justice. Her emotional stake is in the deep conflict between defending her son and recognizing the monstrous truth he's kept hidden. She fears that the revelation will destroy everything she has built, and that she will be forced to choose between family and the truth. Baba Kofi is a village elder and a friend of the Okoro family. Though he is known for his wisdom and his role in upholding the traditions of the village, he has been quietly aware of the tensions in the Okoro family for years. Baba Kofi serves as a voice of reason when the truth about Kofi's dark past is revealed, urging the community to act with compassion and wisdom. His emotional stakes lie in his long-held belief that the village's strength comes from unity and honor. He fears that the truth will shatter the delicate balance of the community and bring ruin upon them all. The sun had just started to dip below the horizon, casting its warm orange glow across the village. The air was thick with a scent of wood smoke and spices, the sounds of drums and laughter filling the evening as the festival began. The people of the village were gathered in their finest clothes, the men draped in bright colours, the women adorned with beads and jewellery passed down through generations. The children ran in and out of the crowd, their giggles echoing in the twilight. It was a night like any other, full of hope, celebration, and the promise of a new beginning. But there was something different about tonight, something that none of them could have predicted. Kofi Okoro, as usual, stood at the centre of it all, his tall, broad frame casting a shadow over the crowd as he laughed and joked with his fellow villagers. He had always been the one to hold things together, the pillar of the community, a man of impeccable reputation. Everyone loved Kofi. He was the kind of man who made you feel like everything would be okay, even if things were falling apart. He had that kind of charm, that easy smile that made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. And then there was Amina. For over a decade, Amina had said nothing, not a word. It wasn't because she lacked the will or because her mind was trapped somewhere beyond reach. No, Amina had simply stopped speaking, and the village had learned to accept it. Some said she had been cursed by an old spirit. Others whispered that she had suffered too much loss. In truth, only Kofi knew the full story, and for years he had kept it locked away, buried deep in the recesses of his heart. He loved Amina, but there was always a part of him that feared her silence. It had become a weight he carried, a constant reminder of something he wished to forget. But tonight, everything would change. The evening was in full swing when it happened. The crowd had gathered around the bonfire, and the drums were louder than ever, their rhythm shaking the ground beneath their feet. Amina, standing off to the side, her head bowed, her face a mask of quiet contemplation, suddenly looked up, and then, against everything anyone could have imagined, she spoke. Her voice was a whisper at first, barely a sound above the crackling of the fire, but as the words fell from her lips, they echoed through the air with a clarity that made everyone stop and listen. "Kofi," she said, her voice trembling, "you are not who they think you are." The crowd fell silent, every ear straining to hear what would come next. Kofi's heart skipped a beat, his face turning pale as the realization hit him. Amina's eyes, once so calm and distant, were now filled with something that sent a chill down his spine, anger, pain, and something darker. She took a step forward, her voice growing stronger with each word. "For years, I have stayed silent, but tonight I will speak the truth. The truth about you." The villagers watched, wide-eyed, as Amina began to recount everything she had suffered in silence. The years of emotional and physical abuse, the manipulation, the darkness that Kofi had tried so desperately to keep hidden. She spoke of a time before the smile, before the charm, when Kofi had been a different man, one who ruled their home with fear, one who had broken her in ways that no one could have imagined. As her words unfolded, the village stood frozen in disbelief. Kofi, the man they all adored, was not the man he appeared to be. The charming trader, the loving husband, the devoted father, he was all a facade. Beneath it all was a man who had hurt the woman he had sworn to protect, who had buried his sins so deep that even the village elders could not see them. Kofi stood there, trembling, his face twisted with a mixture of fear and guilt. His world, which had seemed so solid just moments ago, was crumbling. The truth was out, and there was no hiding from it. Kwame Tete, his old friend and business partner, stepped forward, his brow furrowed with confusion. "Is this true, Kofi?" he asked, his voice shaking. "How could you do this?" Kofi couldn't speak. The words were stuck in his throat, the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. He wanted to deny it, to tell them it wasn't true, but Amina's voice had shattered the illusion. The truth was out, and there was no going back. In the silence that followed, Amina's gaze shifted from Kofi to the villagers, her eyes locking with each one of them. "You all turned a blind eye," she said, her voice steady now. "You saw nothing, because you wanted to see nothing. You all believed in the lies he fed you. But now, you know the truth." The crowd was still, processing the gravity of what they had just heard. Nia, Kofi, and Amina's teenage daughter stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale as she tried to make sense of it all. She had always looked up to her father, always believed he was the hero in her story. Now, her world was shattering, and she didn't know where to turn. As the villagers began to murmur, Baba Kofi, the wise elder, stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This is a time for truth," he said, "but it is also a time for wisdom. We must not let anger cloud our judgment. The truth has been revealed, but what will we do with it?" The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. The village was at a crossroads. Would they turn their backs on Kofi, the man they had all trusted? Would they accept the truth, painful as it was, and confront the darkness that had been hidden for so long? For Kofi, the path ahead was unclear. His life, the carefully constructed world he had built, was crumbling. The one thing he had feared most had come to pass. His secret had been exposed, and now there was no escaping it. But what about Amina? For years, she had been silent, her pain locked away. Now, she had found her voice, and with it, she was ready to face whatever came next. The village was forever changed, and the people would never see Kofi, or their world, the same way again. At first, it was a small thing, just a whisper of unease, A momentary flicker of doubt in Kofi's mind. It started with Amina's silence, something he'd long learned to live with, something he'd convinced himself wasn't a problem. He had managed to brush it aside, burying it under the weight of his good deeds and his charm. But lately, something had been different. Amina's silence had grown colder, more oppressive, like a shadow that loomed over their home, and he could feel the cracks beginning to show in their once perfect marriage. It wasn't a grand revelation or a loud accusation that started it. No, it was the little things. Amina's eyes, always distant, had started to linger on him for just a moment too long, as if she were waiting for him to slip up, to show a crack in his polished exterior. When they sat at the dinner table, she would no longer glance at him with that soft affection he had grown used to. Instead, she would stare blankly at her plate, as though she were somewhere far away, a place he could no longer reach. Kofi had tried to ignore it at first, brushing off the small changes with the justification that the pressures of village life had gotten to her. She was tired, he told himself. It's the weight of the years, the hardships they'd faced. But deep down, Kofi could feel the tension building. There was a growing sense of unease in their home, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The real issue, however, began when Kofi started noticing things. Tiny things, insignificant to anyone else, but far too significant to him. One evening, as he walked through their home, he caught a glimpse of Amina's journal, half hidden beneath a pile of linens on the bed. It wasn't like her to keep things from him, and Kofi's curiosity got the better of him. He opened it, and as his eyes scanned the words, his heart began to race. It was her writing, but it wasn't the Amina he thought he knew. The pages were filled with thoughts he couldn't understand, fears, memories, and the occasional cryptic note about her silence, about the things she had seen, the things she had chosen not to say. It was as though she had been documenting every moment of their life, every time he had hurt her, every time he had lied. Kofi quickly shut the journal and tossed it back onto the bed, his hands trembling. He told himself it didn't mean anything, that it was just the ramblings of a woman who had endured too much. But the unease gnawed at him, like a voice whispering from the shadows, telling him he was running out of time. Over the next few days, the silence between them grew heavier. Amina's eyes would follow him around the room, her gaze steady, almost knowing. She no longer looked at him with love, but with something else, something darker, more calculating. And then came the day when the tension finally snapped. It wasn't an argument or a shouting match, nothing dramatic at all. It was simply a quiet evening. The two of them alone in their home, as the village buzzed with the noise of the ongoing festival. Amina stood by the window, staring out at the distant mountains, her face an unreadable mask. Kofi stood in the doorway, watching her, the familiar weight of her silence pressing on him. He had grown used to this, hadn't he? He had always convinced himself that it was just a phase, that one day Amina would return to him. But tonight, something in her posture, in the way she held herself, told him that this wasn't just about her silence anymore. Amina, he began, his voice soft but laced with urgency. Why are you looking at me like that? What do you want me to say? What do you want from me? For the first time in years, Amina turned to him, her eyes not filled with the familiar sadness, but something colder, more determined. I want the truth, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Kofi's heart skipped. There it was, the quiet question he had feared for so long, the truth. It hung between them like a dark cloud, suffocating the space around them. For a moment, he thought about denying it, about brushing it off, but he knew he couldn't. He had lied to everyone for so long, including himself. The truth was always there, just out of reach, a shadow that had always followed him. And now, Amina was ready to face it. The conflict had started small, just a hint of doubt, a flicker of discomfort in their marriage. But it had grown, silently, steadily. until it had become something that could no longer be ignored. The truth was coming, and Kofi knew there was nothing he could do to stop it. That night, as the village celebrated, the silence between Kofi and Amina was louder than any drumbeat. Kofi could feel the walls closing in, the weight of his own secrets pressing down on him. And in that moment he realized he was no longer in control. The conflict, which had started as a personal struggle with his own guilt and fear, had escalated into something far larger than he could have ever imagined. The truth was coming, and there was no escaping it now. The village would soon know. The dark secret Kofi had buried for so long would finally be exposed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The village of Ikwaku was a place where the old and the new intertwined, where the rhythms of life were dictated not only by the rising sun and the setting moon, but by the whispers of the earth itself. There was a magic here, an ancient power that seemed to pulse beneath the soil, hidden in the folds of the mountains that rose like sleeping giants in the distance, or in the way the winds carried voices from faraway places. The people of Ikwaku spoke of spirits who roamed the land, watching over their ancestors' paths, guiding the living with subtle nudges or warnings. The villagers did not speak of these things often, but everyone knew they were there, and Kofi had always known too. He grew up hearing the stories, the legends of the river spirits that could change a person's heart, the forest guardians who demanded respect, and the ancient snake, Olokun, who could swallow a man whole and take him to the underworld where time moved in reverse. These were not just stories. They were truths passed down by generations of villagers who knew that the fabric of their world was woven with threads of magic. Kofi had listened to those stories with both wonder and fear, but he never truly believed them, not until now. On the night Amina spoke, the air felt different. There was a shift, something in the very atmosphere that Kofi couldn't explain. The usual hum of the night, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of the wind through the trees, was punctuated by a strange, unsettling quiet. The village seemed to hold its breath, as if it too was waiting for something. When Amina spoke, the earth itself seemed to respond. As her voice broke through the silence, the ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, not enough to cause alarm, but enough to make everyone pause. The old people of the village, who had lived through seasons of drought and floods, exchanged uneasy glances. They knew that when the earth moved in such a way, it was a sign. It was the spirits stirring. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. Kofi couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not by Amina or the villagers, but by something else, something far older, more powerful. At night, he would hear faint footsteps outside his window, light as a breeze, but when he looked, there was nothing there. Once, as he walked to the market, he swore he saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest, just where the trees met the village. It was tall, shrouded in mist, its face hidden beneath a cloak of shadows. Kofi's heart raced as he passed by, but the figure never moved, just stared at him from the distance. As the days grew longer, and the tension between him and Amina thickened, the villagers began to whisper of the Ekeleke, the spirit of vengeance that resided deep within the forest. The Ekeleke was known to awaken when a great wrong had been committed, and it would not rest until balance had been restored. The village elders spoke in hushed tones, sharing old warnings about the spirit that had claimed many lives in the past. It was said that the Ekeleke could only be appeased by the one who had caused the harm, and it would drag the wrongdoer into the forest, where the trees would swallow them whole. Kofi dismissed the stories at first. He told himself that they were just tales meant to keep the children in line, that no spirit could harm him. But as his guilt grew heavier, the sense of being watched intensified, and he began to notice strange occurrences that he couldn't explain. The ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble whenever he walked near the edge of the forest, and at night, the shadows in his home grew longer, stretching toward him as if they had a life of their own. One night, as the festival drew near, Kofi wandered into the woods, unable to sleep, the weight of Amina's words pressing down on him like a vice. He had to escape, he told himself. He had to find a way to make this go away, to erase the truth she had revealed. That's when he saw it. In the heart of the forest, where the trees grew thick and ancient, a figure emerged from the mist. It was the same one he had seen before, standing at the edge of the trees, but now it was closer. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch like the branches of the oldest trees. Its face was a blur, shifting between shadows and light, but Kofi could feel its eyes on him, cold, unblinking, all-knowing. The figure spoke, its voice like the wind through dry leaves. You have trespassed into the realm of the dead, Kofi Okoro. You have buried your truth, but it has not forgotten. The forest remembers what you've done. Kofi's heart thudded in his chest, and he stepped back, his breath caught in his throat. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse, like the earth itself was alive, hungry. The figure raised its hand, and Kofi felt a rush of cold air, like a deep, endless sigh. You have two choices, the figure said, its voice now a low hum. Face the consequences of your actions, or run and never return. Kofi wanted to scream, to plead for mercy, but the words caught in his throat. He had always believed that he could outrun his past, that he could bury it beneath his charm and success. But the spirit had found him. And now the village knew too. When he returned home, shaken to the core, Amina was waiting for him, standing at the threshold of their house. Her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, and for a brief moment, Kofi thought he saw something flicker in them, something ancient and knowing, as if she too had felt the pull of the spirits. You have seen it, haven't you? Amina asked, her voice no longer a whisper, but clear and strong. The forest has come for you, Kofi. In that moment, Kofi knew that there was no escape. The magic of the village, the spirits of the land had awoken, and they were here to collect the price for his sins. The Ekeleke was not the only spirit watching him. The river spirits, the forest guardians, even Olokun himself, Kofi could feel their presence, their judgment closing in on him. He had no choice but to face the truth now. The consequences would be grave, and the village would never be the same again. The night of the festival arrived, the village of Ikwuaku, alive with music and laughter, its streets illuminated by flickering lanterns. But for Kofi, there was no joy. The air felt thick, as if the weight of his secrets had permeated the very atmosphere, and everywhere he looked, he saw shadows, shadows that whispered his name. The village was celebrating, but Kofi was drowning in his guilt, haunted by the spirits he could no longer ignore. As the celebrations reached their peak, Amina's words echoed in his mind, clear as day. You have buried your truth, but it has not forgotten. The forest remembers what you've done. It wasn't just her silence that had grown oppressive. It was the weight of everything he had hidden from her and from himself. His lies, his betrayals, the betrayal of the land itself. Kofi had been a man of pride, of charm and success, and yet here he was, standing at the crossroads of his fate, with the spirit of vengeance, the Ekeleke, waiting in the shadows, and Amina, his wife, who now seemed more like a stranger than ever before. As the full moon cast its glow over the village, Kofi found himself drawn once more to the edge of the forest, where the wind carried with it the voices of the ancestors. His feet moved of their own accord, as though some unseen force was pulling him toward the place where his past sins were buried. The figure appeared again, that same shadowy form, towering and ancient, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. You have come to face your truth, it intoned, its voice a deep, reverberating hum. The forest demands justice, Kofi Okoro. Kofi stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to run, wanted to flee, but his legs refused to move. He could feel the ground beneath him shifting, as if the very earth was judging him, weighing his soul. The trees seemed to bend toward him, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, ready to pull him into the darkness. Amina knows, the spirit whispered. She has seen the signs. She has heard the voices of the ancestors. The time of reckoning is here. The words cut through Kofi like a blade. Amina knows. All along, she had known, hadn't she? She had seen the signs, felt the unease that he had buried. He had thought that his secrets were safe, that he had outwitted the world around him. But in the quiet spaces of their life together, Amina had seen through him, had understood the price of his silence and lies. The spirit stretched out its hand, and Kofi felt the cold breath of the forest on his skin. The truth you have hidden must be brought to light, or you will pay the price. Kofi's mind raced. He could hear the laughter of the village drifting in from the festival, distant and hollow. What should he do? The spirits of the land had come for him, the weight of his wrongs now a tangible presence that threatened to swallow him whole. He could lie, deny it all, and face the wrath of the Ekeleke. Or he could speak the truth, expose the dark secret he had kept hidden for so long. The decision was no longer about his survival. It was about something far deeper. Respect for the ancestors, the land, and the woman who had stood by him through everything, even when he hadn't been worthy of it. The cultural values of his people, their reverence for truth, for family, for the interconnectedness of all things, flooded his mind. In that moment, Kofi understood. His pride, his fear, his desire to protect himself, none of it mattered. What mattered was the truth he had hidden away for too long, the truth that had eaten away at him from the inside. The Ekeleke had come not to destroy him, but to force him to confront the legacy of his actions and make amends with his past. With a deep, shuddering breath, Kofi stepped forward, meeting the spirit's glowing eyes. "I did it," he said, his voice breaking through the silence. "I took what wasn't mine. I betrayed her. I betrayed us." The spirit did not move, did not respond. But in that moment, Kofi felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. The ancestors, the spirits of the land, Amina. He could feel the presence of his ancestors in the air, the invisible hands that had once guided his people. They were waiting, watching, expecting him to take responsibility, to honor the truth. Amina appeared then, standing at the edge of the forest, her face illuminated by the moonlight. She was no longer the silent, distant woman he had known. She was strong, her eyes filled with both sorrow and resolve. "You have finally spoken," she said, her voice steady. "But it is not enough. The land demands more." Kofi turned to her, his heart in his throat. He had failed her, failed to protect her, and now the land was demanding justice, not just from him, but from them both. Amina stepped forward, her hand reaching out to him. "The spirits of the land will not forgive the betrayal of the earth, but there is another way. The village must decide. We must confront the wrongs together." The air around them shifted, and Kofi felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. The Ekeleke had not come to destroy him. It had come to call for unity, for the village to come together and heal. The spirits had given him a chance to redeem himself, but it would require the strength of the entire community. Only together could they face the consequences of his actions. As the villagers gathered, drawn by the pull of the spirits, Kofi understood. The Ekeleke had not come for vengeance. It had come for balance. In a place where the land was as sacred as family, where the spirits walked among the living, there could be no peace without truth and collective responsibility. And so, with the village standing together, Kofi and Amina made their way to the heart of the forest, where the Ekeleke stood, waiting. There, surrounded by the ancestors and the spirits of the land, Kofi pledged to make things right, to restore what had been taken, to seek redemption through sacrifice, and to honor the bond between the living and the dead. The climax was not in a single choice, but in the realization that no one could stand alone. The land, the people, and the spirits were all connected. Kofi's redemption could only come through unity, truth, and the willingness to face the consequences of his actions, both in this world and the next. And as the villagers stood together under the watchful eyes of the ancestors, Kofi knew that his life would never be the same. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. The weight of his past would only be lifted when he fully embraced his place in the cycle of life, death, and renewal. As the village stood at the edge of the forest, the moonlight casting long shadows on the ground, the Ekeleke towered over them, its ancient form now bathed in an eerie glow. The spirits of the ancestors seemed to fill the air, their presence thick and heavy, as though they were waiting for the final act of this strange cosmic play. The villagers had gathered, standing together in silent unity, and Kofi and Amina stood at the forefront, their hearts heavy with the weight of the moment. Kofi had confessed his sins. He had revealed the betrayal, the darkness that had festered within him for so long. He had stood before the spirit, the village, and the ancestors, seeking redemption, hoping that his actions would restore balance. But now, as he faced the Ekeleke, he wondered if he could truly be forgiven. The forest was deathly quiet. No wind stirred, no birds called out from the trees. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Amina's hand rested gently on his arm, her presence a quiet strength beside him. The spirit of vengeance watched them both with eyes that seemed to pierce through their souls. Its voice, when it spoke, was deep and filled with ancient authority. The truth has been spoken, but you cannot undo what has been done. Kofi felt a pang of fear. Was this the end? Had his confession, his attempt to make amends, been in vain? But before he could speak, the spirit continued. Your sins will not go unpunished. But there is another path, a path that is not about vengeance, but sacrifice. The Ekeleke raised its hand, and the ground beneath Kofi's feet seemed to tremble. The village must choose, restore what was taken, or accept the consequences of the truth. The villagers looked at one another, their faces filled with uncertainty. Amina's grip on Kofi tightened. What does it mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The land demands balance. The blood spilled must be accounted for, the spirit said, its voice a low hum. But the choice lies with you, Kofi Okoro, and your people. There was a moment of stillness before Kofi, trembling, stepped forward. He had no words left. The weight of his actions, his fears, had driven him to this precipice. But in the end, he knew there was no going back. The Ekeleke had not come just for him. It had come for the whole village, for their past sins, for the unspoken truths buried beneath the soil. Then what must I do? Kofi asked, his voice a whisper. What must we do? The spirit's eyes glowed brighter. You must sacrifice what is most precious to you, a life for a life, a soul for a soul. Amina stepped forward, her voice steady, but there was fear in her eyes. Kofi, it doesn't have to be this way. We can... But before she could finish, the Ekeleke spoke again, its voice sharp and commanding. The choice is made. A sudden silence fell. The villagers stood frozen, unsure of what was happening, unable to move. Kofi's heart raced as the ground trembled beneath him once more, the earth itself seeming to split open in front of him. The air grew thick with tension, the smell of the forest mixing with something dark and ancient, something that felt like death itself. Without warning, the earth split wider, revealing a deep, blackened pit. The Ekeleke extended its hand once more, its eyes glowing with an unearthly light. One must enter, it said. One must face the truth, the past, the ancestors. It is the only way to bring balance. Amina turned to Kofi, her face pale with fear. No, Kofi, don't. You can't. We'll find another way. But Kofi, shaking, understood. He knew what needed to be done. The land had spoken. The spirits had spoken, and now there was no more hiding from the truth. In his moment of greatest fear, he felt something else, something deep within him shift. It was no longer just about his redemption. It was about the village, the land, the very spirit of the place. There was no escaping the weight of the past, and he had to pay the price for what had been taken. Kofi stepped toward the pit, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he was about to do. As he approached, the earth beneath him seemed to pulse with life, drawing him in, urging him to take that final step. He turned to Amina, his eyes filled with regret. "Amina, I'm sorry. I have to do this." Tears filled Amina's eyes, but she said nothing. She knew, just as he did, that this was the only way. With one last deep breath, Kofi stepped into the darkness, feeling the cool embrace of the earth swallow him whole. As he descended, the ground closed behind him, sealing him away from the world above. The villagers, frozen in place, watched in silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of what had just happened. They knew that Kofi had faced the consequences of his actions, but they could not understand what lay beyond the pit, what had truly happened to him. The Ekaleki stood at the edge of the forest, watching the villagers with its ancient, unblinking eyes. It nodded once, and with that, the air shifted again, the stillness broken by the distant sounds of the festival still echoing in the village. But something had changed. The wind now carried a different scent, one of new beginnings, of rebirth. The spirits of the land seemed to watch over them, waiting for what would come next. Amina stood alone in the centre of the village, her heart torn, her gaze fixed on the edge of the forest. She knew Kofi's sacrifice had not been in vain, but what had it truly cost? Was this the end of his story, or just the beginning of something much darker, something that would reverberate through the village for generations to come? As the night wore on, the villagers slowly began to return to their celebrations, unsure of what had just occurred, but aware that their lives had changed forever. But in the deepest corner of the forest, something stirred. A presence, ancient and patient, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The story of Kofi Okoro, the man who had faced his truth and sacrificed everything, was far from over. What he had done, what he had become, would echo throughout the land, and the consequences of his actions would stretch far beyond the village, into the very heart of the forest. The Ikaleke had not been appeased, and the spirits were still watching,